Hello, everyone. My name is John Parkins, and I'm presenting this paper today. It was co-authored by my colleagues Kate Sharon and Ellen Chappell at Dalhousie University. So I need to back up a couple of years and talk about the initial study. A few years ago, we published some work on the relationship between energy infrastructure development and support for energy in Canada based on a national survey. And we found some interesting and perplexing anomalies in our data. And so we thought we needed to look into this in more detail. So I'm showing you the results of this initial study, which looks at different types of energy technologies. You can see across the top from nuclear all the way over to coal. And I've circled the regression analysis looking at coal in particular, and also looking at the gender variable. And you can see that in all of the other models, the relationship is negative, meaning that women support these technologies less than men. But this is not the case for coal. We know it's not a significant relationship, but the relationship is positive, and it got us thinking about what's going on here. Why is this a positive relationship with this coal model? We can also see that the R-square is quite a bit lower for coal than the other technologies. So it just made us wonder if there's something else that's going on here. So this is why we sort of dug into this in more detail and was the study. So a quick background on some of the literature that we draw on in the paper. A lot of the focus in the paper is on the relationship between gender and environmental concern, environmental problems. We also look at some of the literature in coal communities, and we note that women are more likely to speak out against coal fields than men, suggesting that women might be willing to express their concerns around the impacts of coal. And we also look in some detail at this idea of the knowledge deficit model. But we know from a lot of research that there's a very complicated relationship between an individual's level of knowledge and their environmental concern. And we expect that this relationship will be complicated in this study as well. So we draw on all of these areas of study to really try and help us answer this question: why do women have greater support for coal in this particular data set? So let's get into it in a little bit of detail. First, we'll start with some background. And you can see here that in Canada, coal is a big part, or has been a big part of the energy landscape for a long time. The big blue area is the province of Alberta. You can see coal production is quite active in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and as well as in the eastern provinces, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. But this rate of production is declining, with the expectation that much of the production will be curtailed by 2030. Here's another map of coal-fired power plants across the country. Again, big operations in Western Canada and Alberta in particular, as well as operations in Atlantic Canada, and then closures in Central Canada. And this was a map from 2015. That was just the year after our data was collected in 2014. So when we ask people about coal, when we do the general population survey, these are the kinds of things that people would be thinking about in and around their province in different parts of the country. So a little bit on the data set itself. So this data was collected in 2014. This was an online survey, a panel. We had 3,000 respondents, and we had quotas for a number of different factors, which give us some confidence that the data we have is broadly representative of the Canadian population. So let's take a look at the data itself. So as I'd mentioned earlier, we noted in the earlier study that women tend to support coal more than men, and we can see that in the mean values at the bottom that are bolded. So for women, it's 1.2 1.68 on a 5-point scale, and for men it's 1.59. We know that this is not a big difference, but it is statistically significant, mainly because we have a large data set. But the more interesting thing in this table is the fact that when you look at just the support variable, so support or strongly support, we can see that support is exactly equal between men and women at 13%. What is different here is the neutral category. So we can see that for men, 33% are neutral, but for women, it's 42%. So we have a lot more women in this study who sort of are much more neutral with regard to their support. That neutrality could be interpreted in a number of different ways. Perhaps not sure, perhaps just on the fence around, support and opposition, the costs and benefits, and so on. And so I think this is one of the first insights that, looking at the means themselves is just not sufficient. We really do need to kind of get into the details of the data in order to really start to understand what's going on. And the first insight for us was sort of realizing that it's the neutral category that's really explaining a lot of the differences between men and women in this data set. Looking a little more deeply into the knowledge variables that we had. So there are 3 variables here. There's tested knowledge on the left, tested knowledge, or factual knowledge. We kind of gave them questions that have a true or false answer. There's also perceived knowledge, so self-reported knowledge of the general energy system, as well as perceived coal knowledge. And we can see from the data here that across all of these different types of knowledge, men score higher than women. So for example, on self-reported knowledge, the mean for men is 3.15. and the mean for women is 2.68. So we can see here that men have higher tested knowledge and higher self-reported knowledge, but the question still remains, does knowledge really matter? So given that men tend to have more knowledge, at least according to the data we collected here, does that actually predict their attitudes, their support or opposition to coal or other technologies? So this is what we're going to be addressing in detail here. So I want to give you some results from this study, from this paper that we're presenting today. So these are new results we haven't published yet, and these are regression results just looking at the significant variables only, and I'm showing you the odds ratio. So if the further to the right you go, if the bar goes to the right, that's more support for coal. So we can see, for example, if an individual thinks that the costs or the benefits outweigh the cost of coal production, then somebody is likely to be twice as supportive, 1.97, or almost twice as supportive of coal in Canada. Conversely, you can see that the male variables, so if you're male, you're less likely to support coal. These are the results of the full model where men and women are included in our analysis. And we can see that knowledge matters here, but it's complicated. So tested knowledge is sort of less support. Perceived knowledge is associated with more support. The values variables are significant. Trust is significant, and some of the demographic factors are also significant. So for example, if you live in the western provinces, such as Alberta and Saskatchewan, you're likely to be more supportive of coal than, for example, if you live in Quebec. So that's one set of results. We move to the analysis where we're separating out men and women. If we just look at men within the data set, we can see that the knowledge variables disappear. So knowledge really doesn't predict men's support for coal at all. What is a factor are these values and attitude variables. You can see that the cost benefits, so if you think that the benefits outweigh the costs of coal production, then you're more than twice as likely to support coal. If you're a man in Quebec, then you're much less likely to support coal. Conversely, if we look at the women in the study, knowledge is a factor, but again, it's complicated, where tested knowledge sort of negatively related with support for coal, whereas perceived knowledge is positively related. And we can also see the trust variables are significant there, particularly trust for outsiders, or sorry, trust for insiders. Insiders meaning government and industry associated with the energy sector. So women are tending to trust more these different institutions in terms of how to think about coal than men are. So this gives us some insight in terms of the quite significant differences in the models and the outcomes if we break it out between men and women. And this is really the heart of the analysis that we present within our paper. So let me come to some conclusions then. To draw things to a close, we can see that there are multiple factors associated with influencing support for coal power in Canada. And these factors are quite different for men versus women. And these differences are quite enduring. So we can see, even when we really dig into the details, that there are these enduring differences between men and women in their perspectives on coal. And when we think about the knowledge deficit model, going back to the role of knowledge, our results are contrasting or different from recent research that's been published on this issue, where we find that increasing energy knowledge, factual or perceived knowledge, will likely only lead to increased opposition for coal among some people. So if we want to develop a knowledge campaign around phasing out coal-fired power plants, that may be effective for some people, but in our data it suggests that for men in particular, increasing factual knowledge or perceived knowledge has really no effect on an individual's support or opposition for coal. So these are some of the key results that we find in this particular study, and I look forward to the discussion to follow in this presentation. And if you'd like more information about this research, or if you'd like to see a draft copy of our paper, we'd be happy to share it with you, and you can see my contact details there. So thank you very much.